We still have a few people coming in, but we'll just get started because we have a lot to talk about today. My technical director tells me I was overly ambitious with doing 4 soups, and he could be right. So it's going to be a busy afternoon. We're going to start with a pasta fagioli because that one takes quite a while to cook. If any of you have ever been to the Olive Garden and had it there, this is very similar. And I have to give credit to my little sister, Shelly. She kind of got me started with this recipe, and I've tweaked it a little bit. But the original recipe that she gave me was definitely from her, Shelly Kramer. So I did a little bit of research into each of the soups that we're going to talk about today. And the pasta fagioli, of course, is an Italian soup. What I found was that it originated in the Campania region of Italy. And of course, as most of these soups today, these hearty soups that we think of as winter soups, they began as peasant soups because the ingredients were generally easy to find and plentiful even in the winter. So pasta fagioli is one of those soups that began as a peasant soup. And I think we still have a few people coming in. So I'll just give some of the basics. What I need to say today is that we are very, very happy to have a sponsor for World Kitchen. After a little over a year of doing this, we now have the Penn State Outreach and Online Education Office of Inclusion, Equity, and Diversity sponsoring World Kitchen for us, which makes things a little bit easier. They're paying for all of the ingredients and things like that. We haven't had that for the first 14 months. So if you know anyone over there, or it's Karen Armstrong's office, be sure and thank them. The other thing I want to say is we are recording this, but feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question, or you can put your question in the chat if you'd like to do that. I guess I'd like to know if anybody is cooking along with us today. Just by the nature of having these 4 soups to get through in hopefully not much over an hour, I did do a lot of pre-chopping. So if you are cooking along with me and you haven't pre-chopped, just let me know and I'll try to slow down for you. I know if you're going to be trying to do the Persian soup, the Ash-e Reshteh, that one does require a lot of chopping of herbs. So if you're going to cook along and you haven't done that one, definitely let me know because you're going to be chopping for a while. So I guess we'll get started with the pasta fagioli, and we're going to move over to the stove. So we're going to be moving back and forth a little bit today, but not quite as much. Most of this is going to be happening over at the stove. So we're going to start with our dehydrated onion and our ground beef over in a skillet with some oil. Alex, you want to come over to the stove? This to the back for now. So I have some olive oil here in my pan. And move that around a bit. And this one is pretty simple. I'm sure if most of you have browned ground beef with some onions. So that's what we're doing. Now this beginning of this requires the dehydrated onions, and you see later on we're going to be adding some actual fresh diced onion. But for now, we're just starting with the dehydrated. And I think that's primarily to flavor the meat a little more strongly. And then later, the fresh onions will be cooking into the soup to give you that onion flavor in the soup itself. Okay, let me take a couple minutes. I'm going to just salt and pepper that slightly. So if you're cooking along with me today, let me know.
One person says they are cooking with you and have their herbs prepared.
Oh, great. Awesome. That's good to know. Okay. I'm gonna start heating up here. I like to use a fairly lean cut of ground beef. I also get my beef now from a local farm. We buy a quarter of beef at a time and share that with family and friends. So I really have, we started that during the pandemic, and I think it's been really good for us to have these in the freezer and not have to shop so frequently, because as those of you who live in the college area know, unless you have a source yourself, a farm, you would often have to just go to the farmers markets on the weekends. And in the winter, that gets to be a little difficult. I think there's only one or two that are indoor in the winter. So having these in the freezer is nice to have on hand. Okay, we got that going. While that's working, bring this pot back down and pull over a little bit more oil in there, which I have. And then we are going to pull over our carrots, onions, and celery. And these again are just going to go right into the pan. As you can see, I have half a bunch. I'd say that was about 5 stalks of celery. And I did use the green tops. As you can see, I went ahead and kept those and chopped those up a little bit too. I think if you use those green leaves on the top of your celery, it adds some flavor to the celery or to the dish you're creating. Then I've also got 1 medium onion chopped up, diced pretty thin. Wow, you can already start smelling that. And then I just purchased 1 bag of matchstick carrots. It says 1 10-ounce bag shredded, and I get the matchstick ones at my local grocery store. Here we go. This recipe can easily be cut in half or doubled. It really does work well. The only thing I would say is if you're going to double it, you can see I'm using a really, really large pot here. And it's kind of a joke in my family between my sister and I that when we make this recipe at twice what you see on your recipe, it will overflow this pan and you have to get another pan out and do your best because it's a lot. So for the recipe that you have, I actually had already cut that in half from the original recipe. We're gonna let those simmer while we stir up our ground beef here and break it up a little bit more. You can obviously do this with your wooden spoon or spatula, as I'm doing. But I was also going to show you this nifty little tool I got years ago. And I know some of you have said in the past that you have these as well. This is actually from Pampered Chef, but it is this fabulous little tool to break up your ground meats. And I also really like it mashing potatoes. You can use it on a lot of different things. I'm gonna use that here for a minute to kind of break this ground beef up. I'd ask, so I know I noticed a lot of the names of the folks who signed up have been with me for several of the episodes, but if you're new, welcome. And if you've been with me all along, thanks for sticking with us. As I said, if you're fairly new, you may not know that we started World Kitchen in October of 2020, kind of the middle, I guess, of what we thought was the middle of the pandemic. We were hoping it would be over sooner, but it looks like that's not happening as early as we had hoped. Here in State College, I know we've got another spike of cases, so we're kind of hunkering down and staying home quite a bit again. For those of you who have been WPSU fans for a long time and have maybe attended our WPSU Connoisseurs Dinner, we did make the decision a couple of weeks ago to go fully remote again this year on that. So it will be free and open to the public to watch. It's going to be a great, very World Kitchen-esque event, because our guest chef, who was going to be here in person if we had done the in-person event, her name is Julianne Sagir, and she is from PBS's Julie Tabouli's Lebanese Kitchen. So Julie will be doing a private cooking demonstration for us of her Lebanese cuisine from her studio up near Syracuse. So we're really excited that she's going to be doing that. And as I said, that will be free and open to anyone who wants to watch. We'll also be having our WPSU silent auction that night. It will be an online auction. So for more information about any of that, check out WPSU.org and look for the Connoisseurs event and auction. That will be happening on February 5th. So in just about 6 weeks or so. All right, this ground beef is looking pretty good. Just a couple more minutes. I know it's going to cook some more in the stew, so I'm not too worried about it being overly cooked, but I do like it to be nice and brown. Okay. And then I'm also going to give my vegetables a stir here. This happens to be my favorite soup when I do go to Olive Garden. So it's nice to have a recipe for it. It's pretty close. All right, those are cooking up nicely too. Okay, next we are going to add in our tomatoes and our beans. So here are, it says you're supposed to be adding, according to the recipe, 2 14-ounce cans. I have 1 28-ounce can, so I'm just adding that in. And I did go ahead and got some Italian tomatoes. The Italian these are San Marzano, so they're supposed to be an actual Italian tomato, but this also includes garlic, basil, olive oil, and sea salt in the tomatoes, which gives it that nice Italian flavor. So we're going to add those in, and then I'm going to add in a can of kidney beans and a can of Great Northern. I was looking for navy beans and couldn't find navy beans this week, so I'm just using Great Northern. It's really just to have a white bean in there. I don't think it's crisp this time. Okay, I'm going to stir that up. That continue to simmer there. And I think my ground beef is just about ready. So as you can see, we've got the vegetables, the beans and tomatoes all in the pot over here. Now I'm going to add the ground beef in. Okay, I'm going to move this over to my high burner. Turn that one off. There we go. And now I'm going to mix that all together. All right, now it is time. I'm going to turn that up just a bit to get that going a little bit hotter. And now it's time to add in our garlic, our spaghetti sauce, our stock, and our bouillon cubes. So I will get my stock and the garlic here. So I have already minced the garlic. I have It said half a teaspoon. This is like a clove and a half of minced garlic. I'm going to add that in. Then I'm going to add in 1.5 boxes of beef stock. And we started this soup first because this one really does need time to simmer and cook down. We started this one first to get that going. Another 1/2 box here. And then we also are going to add in our spaghetti sauce. You can use whatever spaghetti sauce you prefer. I think the original recipe my sister gave me used Prego, so I have always used Prego, and I just get the plain marinara or 3 cheese. And that is 32-ounce jar of spaghetti sauce. Goes in, mix all that up. Okay. And now the bouillon. So this called for 2 cubes of beef bouillon. So I'm just going to use 2 teaspoons of my granulated because I think a teaspoon is about equal to 1 cube. There we go. Mix all that in.
Someone is asking, do you ever use any other type of ground meat?
I haven't, but I really think you could easily use ground turkey or ground chicken. This is the, the very traditional soup or the pasta fagioli recipe, but obviously I think it would be just perfectly fine with the ground chicken or the ground turkey. You can also, change up the beans if you like. Okay, the next thing we're going to do then is to add in our pasta, and this was supposed to be about 8 ounces of elbow pasta. There we go. So the pasta is obviously going to cook as the soup is simmering. That in there. It's also going to thicken this up a little bit. Now, this is also where you can add some Tabasco sauce. If you like it a little spicier, go ahead and add some Tabasco sauce in now. I'm going to add a little bit of salt. A lot of people in my family are not big on the Tabasco sauce, and if they want, they can add that later. So I'm going to do my salt and pepper.
Betty is asking, does the soup freeze well?
Yes, you can definitely freeze this. And then obviously you would just heat it up in a pan or, let it thaw. And I guess you could even heat it in the microwave if you've let it thaw enough, but it does freeze.
And Roxy's asking, do you think brown sausage would work?
Oh, that's interesting. What a great idea. I think that would make it, give it a very different flavor. I think that'd be a great idea. Right. So we're at the point now where this has just got to really simmer for about 45 minutes. So I'm going to put the lid on and move it to a back burner so that it can simmer while we're moving on to our next soup. Get that one on. Okay, just gonna let that simmer. All right, there we go. Now, I will let Alex move that back over, and I'm just gonna tidy up my side here a little bit, and we'll move on to the next soup.
Right?
Next one will be our ash. So this is the Persian soup. Those of you who've been with us for a while know I do a lot of Persian recipes. This one is a very traditional Persian soup. It's very I think it would be called the most, Alex, I think we need to tilt up slightly.
Oh, sorry.
I think it would be the most popular of the ashes. So ash in Persian, in Farsi, means thick soup, and reshteh means noodle. So this is a thick noodle soup. It's there. From what I found out and what I've learned, there are over 50 different ashes in Iran. So this is one of those, and this is the most popular. It's usually made around Persian New Year, which is the spring equinox. So right around March 21st, it's very popular at that time of year. And they make huge vats of it, like outdoor burner with a big kettle kind of thing. And they pass it out to family and friends and people just walking by. So it's great for Persian New Year or just any of your cold winter nights where you need a hearty soup. I did find one interesting story. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with the television show Seinfeld that was very popular several years ago. But in that show, one of the characters that kind of has been very well known is the guy they called the soup Nazi. He decided whether or not he was going to sell you soup based on your behavior or what you look like or whatever. And there was always a long line for his soups. So that became a pretty popular character in the series Seinfeld. Well, in my research, I found that the theory goes that the actual chef that was based on, that character, was an Iranian chef in New York City, in Manhattan, who had a soup restaurant and often had lines out and around the corner for his soups. And that the soup that this was based on was Ash-e Reshteh, which is what we're going to be making today. So it's a delicious soup. I've never had anyone who tasted it who didn't love it. It's not the most attractive looking soup, but it tastes fabulous. So we will get moving on that next. So in our large pot, we are going to start with some olive oil, and we are going to heat our onion and garlic in that olive oil. Let me take this over to the stove. There we go. All right, back on. So putting some olive oil in here. And most of you have been around know that I tend to cook with olive oil, especially if it's not something that's going to be at very high heat. Olive oil does have a pretty low smoking heat. So if you're going to cook something that's going to cook at a really high temperature, you might not want to use the olive oil. But for most of what I do, the olive oil is perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and add in my medium onion. Oh, wait a minute. Here I am. Wrong one. Sorry. I thought there was more than that. This is two large chopped onions. Go. And this is 6 cloves of minced garlic. Sounds like a lot of garlic, and it is, but it all cooks down and it just makes it delicious. We're going to start with getting that sauteed. We want that to get nice and tender. So the onions start to get slightly translucent. And again, I think this is one of those soups, as we were talking about earlier, that the ingredients are nothing, fancy or special. They're easy to access in the winter. I know when I've been in Iran with my family, I found it interesting that they all seem to have, or many of them seem to have almost like a root cellar under their house, where they kept a lot of onions and different things over the winter to keep them cold and ready to use. So the onions, the garlic, the potatoes, other root vegetables, you can always find those pretty easily through the winter.
Betty's asking what kind of olive oil works well for sauteing, cooking meat, etc.
Honestly, I use extra virgin olive oil because I don't want the heavy olive oil taste. And the extra virgin is the one that kind of tends to have a very light flavor. So we do get at our local grocery store, we get
the massive container, as you can see, because we use quite a bit. I will say that there are, at my store, which is, I'll just say it out loud, we go to Wegmans, there are two different types. This one is just extra virgin olive oil, and I think it is in the maybe $17 or $18 range for this huge jug. They have another one that's a little more cold pressed, I believe, or something like that, which is about $26 for the same size. I don't go to that extreme. I just go ahead and get this extra virgin, and it works out great. So my onions are starting to get a little translucent, and smell that garlic. So while that's simmering there, I'm going to grab my lentils and my rice. And I've already rinsed these, both of these. So I have half a cup of dry lentils that I rinsed and half a cup of basmati rice that I also rinsed. So those are going straight into the onions here. And again, these recipes, all of my Persian recipes tend to be either from friends, Iranian friends, or from some great cookbooks that I have that I often tweak a little bit to our taste, but they're generally pretty simple. I think a lot of Persian food looks really complicated, but it's actually very simple. If any of you were with me, my first episode back in October 2020 was the baklava recipe, and that's a Persian baklava. And again, it looks so complicated and intricate, but it's really very simple. So something easy to do. And if you have any interest in looking back at any of the episodes that we've already done, those are always on the WPSU website at wpsu.org/worldkitchen. You can always go back and look at old episodes. All right. Going in. All right, now we need to get some water and we're going to start adding in our broth. Alex, can you get some water in a pitcher, please? Now, you typically would do this with chicken broth, and I normally do too, but my vegetarian daughter just got home for the holidays, and because I want her to be able to eat this as well, I'm going to use vegetable broth today. But if you don't have a vegetarian you're trying to steer clear of with the meat stock, go ahead and use that chicken broth. I'm going with the vegetable broth today. And this says it's supposed to be about 8 cups. That's okay. I'm going to start with about 2 boxes of this vegetable broth. All right, here we go. Okay. Stirring that up a bit. And now I'm going to start adding in my canned beans and my turmeric. And you will find that there is turmeric in almost any Persian dish that is a stew or a soup, or even the shish kebabs that we've done before, we did with the Persian barbecue. They use a lot of turmeric. And I guess they knew long before we did the medicinal value of turmeric and being able to use it. So I put that in. Now I'm adding my kidney beans. And my garbanzo beans or chickpeas, whichever you prefer to call them. Give that a stir. And now I'm going to pull over all of my herbs. So this is the one I was saying. I'm sorry if I didn't tell you in advance. There was a lot of herbs to clean and chop. So what this is about 3 cups of parsley that I washed and took the woody stems out of and chopped. 2 cups of fresh cilantro, the same thing, wash it, take out those heavy stems. Honestly, I did not find any fresh mint this week at Wegmans. So I'm going to be adding in some dried mint, which will be not exactly the same, but it'll be fine. And then I have 1 bunch of, I got green onions that I'm adding in, and I had 1 bag of baby spinach. So I chopped all of that. It's all here in this bowl, and I'm adding it all in now. There. Move these in, give them a nice stir to get all of those herbs down in the broth. Okay, while that's sitting there just a second, I'm going to grab this mint. And I've told you before, I have my mint brought in special by my husband from Iran. So I get dried mint that the lovely ladies over there have dried and cleaned and chopped. So I have this beautiful dried mint. I'm going to add kind of a handful of that in here since I didn't have that fresh mint. If you had the fresh mint, you won't need the dried. Okay. Stir that in. That is gonna cook down. So I'm gonna move this to another back burner and let it just simmer for a while. This one off, that one on. There we go. That's gonna simmer. I think I'm gonna grab my lid for that pot as well. Over there. Okay, let's move back over to the front camera and I'll explain about the herbs a little bit. Okay, so those of you who've been with me know that my husband comes back and forth from the Middle East quite a bit. So he's able to bring me some things that you would normally find over there that we don't really see here. You can get these things through mail order here. There are several places in Los Angeles or Atlanta, Georgia, I think maybe Virginia, where you can order mail order for these. So normally when I make this dish now here at home, I might have a little bit of fresh herbs in it just for the brightness and the extra like flavor. But generally he brings me these dried herbs, and this package is specifically a mixture for Ash. There are specific mixtures for other Persian soups and stews, like the ghormeh sabzi that we have frequently, or some of the other dishes. But this one happens to be specifically for Ash, for any of the Ashes. And it has all of these. Yep.
This is Masame. The Turkish store on Hamilton Avenue has Iranian sabze in a can.
Oh, okay.
It may not be as good as the things that you have there, but I actually did cook it tried it a couple of nights ago for Ash.
Great. Great.
It's not usually, it's a different tasting Ash than I normally make, but.
Okay. Yeah. One of the things that's hardest to find here that is kind of a staple in these types of herbs is the fenugreek. We don't typically see fenugreek here or find it in the stores much. So that's the thing that's hard to get the exact taste of.
when you're just going with the fresh herbs. I mean, we did it for years and years before he started traveling back and forth so much. And I just went with whatever herbs I could find. Now that I have these, I have an entire pantry full of these bags of different Ash mixes. So Masame, if you ever need any, come on over. Okay, so that's what I wanted to say about those. The other thing I want to say, because we'll be adding this in pretty quickly a little later, is the noodles. So again, he brings me these Persian noodles called Reshteh. You can, I don't know if you can see, they're fairly thin. So they're fairly thin. And I've looked to see if you don't have the Reshteh, and I believe I may have seen these at the Turkish market recently. So be sure and check out, it's in, if you're here locally in State College, it's in the Hamilton Square Plaza off of South Atherton. And it's pretty new, it's been there for several months, but they're trying and they're expanding their inventory all the time. And I think is it called World Foods, something like that? Global Foods maybe. But anyway, it is in that Hamilton Square Plaza. However, if you don't have these, you can also use linguine. Linguine will work as well. Okay, we'll be adding those in just a bit. I also brought just some non-fat yogurt that I'm going to use to top my Ash when it's done. Normally in a Persian home, you would find kashk. I personally don't use kashk much here because it's typically made with sheep's milk, and I don't like the flavor of that. You can occasionally find it made with cow's milk, which is great if you can find it, but I think it works just as well with yogurt, and I've even seen people use sour cream, so that works fine too. And then in a little while, we're going to be doing the other topping, and I'll show you how that works. But first, before we do that, we're going to move on to the next soup while those two are simmering. So let me put this aside, and I'm going to grab, yes, I'm also going to grab some of these real quick because I didn't do them for the topping. There we go. All right, let's put that aside for now. All right, next up is going to be the French onion. And as any of you who may have tried to do this in advance know, it's a lot of onions. So I also have a tendency to use, that's the other one. No, yeah, that's okay. Yep, okay. I like to use my mandolin for this because you're chopping a lot of onions and you do need them to be fairly thin. Now on my mandolin, there are two different settings. There's the really, really thin that I would say is almost paper thin, makes the onion that you're slicing look almost translucent. And then there's another one that is probably, I don't know, 1/8 of an inch, maybe, not even 1/4 inch. And that's what we're going for. So as you can see, this is the, kind of the thinness of the onion. You don't want it super, super thin because then it's just going to melt and fall apart. But you do want it to be, relatively thin, which is why it's kind of hard to do this with a knife. So we kept one out just to show you how this works with my mandolin. And if you have one of your own, it may work differently. But you just press down, and this keeps you from, cutting yourself as well. I did have my technical director, Alex, do these in advance for all of the ones you see in the bowl there. Okay, I think that's enough. There we go. So this is the onion. And again, it's pretty thin. You'll toss that right in there. Back over here. All right, so next up is our French onion was going to be in, sorry, I'm trying to remember which pot I was doing which thing in because they have different sizes. So I'm going to start this in my Dutch oven, which is another kitchen tool that I haven't had terribly long, but I really, really like it. I think I bought it a year ago, Black Friday, when I found it on sale. I had always wanted one of the fancy brand that you all know, La Creuset, but those things are hundreds of dollars and I just couldn't justify spending that. So I did find this one. I think it was last year on Black Friday. And it's not that brand, but gets equally great reviews. So I think, you know, if you can find one that gets great reviews and looks good, go ahead, don't worry about the brand. So let's, Alex, move over to the French onion soup. Okay. All righty. Take my lid off here. French onion soup is another one of those peasant soups. It's got really inexpensive ingredients, and so it's easy to do. So what you're gonna, the key to the French onion soup though, let me get my heat going here. And I need my butter here. Move this all over here a little closer. Okay, get my butter going in there. So the key to the French onion soup is to really caramelize your onions. And I think the one thing that a lot of people have trouble with is the patience to caramelize the onions, because it does take time. And you want it to be hot enough to cook them, but not so hot that it burns them. Get that butter melted a little bit there. A little bit of parsley. And also using the butter obviously helps a lot with caramelizing the onions. This is one instance where I know, you know, butter has cholesterol and those sorts of things, but I think the butter is really important in this recipe. So we don't eat this often. And when we do, we want it to taste good. So we actually use the butter. All right. I'm gonna start adding my onions in here. And I know you're gonna all say that this looks like way too many onions, looks like a ton of onions, and we always feel that way, especially when we're crying as we're slicing them, but they cook down a lot. And you will see in the end that it doesn't make nearly as much as you think it will. So I'm gonna let that get hot. And one of the other keys to getting your onions good and caramelized is to not mess with them too much. Get them in there, let them get hot, let them sit in the heat, and then stir them, get the rest down. As you can see, there's a lot of onions in here. So it's going to take a little time for them to work their way down. But once they do, you'll see that it's not going to look as deep as it does now. They're all going to kind of mush down, and they will eventually kind of all be sitting on the bottom of the pan. And that's when they'll start to caramelize. But as I said, that does take some time. Make sure that you do try to break them up. You know, as you slice them on the mandolin or with the knife, you're going to get slices of them all together, the rings. Try to break those rings up as much as you can so that they can all hit the butter and all cook evenly. All right, I'm going to let that go for a few minutes there. The other thing that I wanted to mention is the recipe calls for sherry. I don't have any sherry, and I typically don't keep sherry here. If you have it, awesome, please use it. But you'll see that I'm not using that. I'm just going to be using the white wine when I'm cooking mine.
And while this is cooking, sorry. I'm going to heat up my broth. So I'm going to turn this on, start heating my broth. So I am using 2 boxes of beef stock. So researching French onion soup, as I did a bit. Oh, gotcha. Sorry about that. Just a second. My little piece of foil from the top of the box got into the soup. I'm gonna pull that out there. There we go. All right. So in looking into the French onion soup and the history of it, it goes way, way back. Historically, they said that they've seen reference to it as far back as Roman times. But again, it was a peasant dish because of it's mainly onions, which was always cheap and easy to get. The modern version of French onion soup, they can date back to Paris in the 18th century. And it was introduced at a restaurant in Paris and altered just slightly. And then it made its way to the United States, arriving in New York in a restaurant owned by Henry Mouquin, Mouquin, in 1861. And over the next 100 years, it became very, very popular and spread out to the rest of the country. And apparently by the 1960s, it was kind of the thing to cook if you were, you know, the hostess with the mostest and wanted to show off your culinary skills. So by the 1960s, it became very popular throughout the rest of the US. These are all starting to cook down. They're starting to look a little more wilted. So we want that to keep happening. I'm gonna stir my beef broth slightly here. Is anybody else cooking along with this one? Or was my cook along was just for the ash, or were you cooking anything else? While we're waiting for this all to warm up, I'll talk to you a little bit about the cheese that we're going to use. So a little later on, we're going to be creating our topper for our French onion soup. And that is going to be a nice crusty bread. We get the Tuscan garlic bread out at Wegmans. That's what we like to use. And we like to broil it with a little bit of Gruyere cheese, shredded Gruyere cheese over the top. And then you can put that directly onto your bowl of soup. Now, if you get it in a restaurant, often they will go ahead and put the French onion soup into a specially designed bowl, which looks a little bit like something like this. My daughter and son-in-law brought me a couple of these when they visited Bedford Springs Resort. And so these are really nice French onion dishes. But to be honest with you, my family likes a little bit more soup than this. These are fairly small. This holds about a cup or a little over a cup. But traditionally what they would do is they would put the French onion soup in these dishes and then put the bread on top, add the cheese on top, and broil the entire dish in the oven. We kind of separate the two things and just put our soup in a dish, broil the bread separately, and add them on top later.
Lynn says that she's cooking ash today, then French onions soon, and the other two soon after.
Oh, great. just know that you're gonna have to spend a lot of time waiting for your onions to start caramelizing. All right, keep going there. They're wilting down, but they haven't really started browning yet. That sort of happens all at once. It'll happen. And what are you doing there?
You can't, the
Oh,
onions
the
are getting
light.
blown out.
Okay,
Okay.
there we go. A little bit. I don't know. Yeah, it's hard to see. There we go. Yeah.
Right.
So they are melting down and getting translucent, but they're not really starting to brown on the bottom yet. That's going to take a little bit more time. In the meantime, though, my broth is heating up over here, which is good. And we could also check in on our other soups. So the ash back here is cooking. The vegetables or the herbs are starting to wilt. And the pasta fagioli also cooking up nicely here. It's getting nice and thick. The pasta has, rehydrated there. Now this is the point where when you're cooking the pasta fagioli, you might want to keep an eye on it because that pasta does suck a lot of the liquid out of your dish. So keep an eye on it. If it looks like it's starting to get a little dry, this is where you might want to add some water or some additional broth. I have some extra broth here I can add in. Yeah, pasta fish. Yeah. So I'm going to add a little bit more broth in there just so it's not quite as dry. I don't like it too runny, but I also don't want it to dry out and start to stick. So add a little bit to that. That back on lightly. Okay. So here. Maybe Alex, we could go ahead and start getting the pan out to do the bread, and we can line that up. Take a look at these. Now, when we start our bread, we typically go ahead and brush it with some olive oil or butter. For this one, I probably will just go ahead and use some olive oil. Get that over here in just a minute. And what I do typically with that, when I'm doing that, is I broil those in under the broiler instead of baking, just to get them a little quicker and a little crunchier. Yeah, I think 2 would be fine for now. I want to bring the camera over. Let that sit. All right, so then we can go back to the overhead. All right, I've got a little bit of olive oil and a brush, and I'm just going to brush those pieces of nice crunchy Tuscan bread. There we go. And then I'm going to take my shredded Gruyere. We like a lot of cheese on ours. You can go as heavy or as light as you like. Get that Gruyere on there. I'm going to turn the broiler on, please.
go. Right. Lose any of that nice cheese. Okay. So as soon as that broiler gets good and hot, we will pop those into the oven and get those broiled up. And in the meantime, I think what we could do for the next soup, which is the crab corn chowder. For those of you, if you are cooking along or not, I tend to cook my bacon in the oven. So I did that this morning. I bake it on a baking sheet with a baking rack so that the oil drips down. And that takes about 20-25 minutes at about 400. And so that's what happened. I baked it this morning and then I just crumbled it all up. So I've got my bacon. Now the recipe says that you can save those bacon drippings and use them in your soup. And I think that obviously would give it a lot of flavor. But again, because I want my my pescatarian, vegetarian daughter to be able to eat this, we're only going to let people add their bacon after, as they eat the soup. So I didn't include any of that bacon drippings into my recipe, but you can certainly do that. Okay, Alex is going to stick those into the broiler. And I will say, you need to just kind of keep an eye on those because it'll tend to go pretty fast. All right, let's come back over here. And now we're finally starting to see a little bit of brown on the bottom of these onions, which is good. So this should go a little bit faster now that they're starting to brown up a little bit. You just had to really sweat a lot of the moisture out of them. And then they kind of start to cook quite a bit faster. And in the meantime, my beef stock is heating nicely over here on the other side. So this should go pretty. You could also add a little bit of salt and pepper now to your onions if you like. Some browning going. That's good. All right. Just a little bit longer. And right before we get started, where did that other sheet go, Alex? With the tell you a little bit more about the crab corn chowder as we're waiting, because I know we're running a little bit late. So the crab corn chowder, I found references to that as early as 1884, and it was published in the Boston Cookbook by Mary Lincoln, who was not a Mary Lincoln we all think of, but a Boston Mary Lincoln. And then in the early 1900s, apparently Shakers began to cook a lot of chowders and things, and so they kind of took over. And you see this crab corn chowder in a lot of the Shaker cookbooks from that early 1900s time frame. Again, these are basically very hearty winter soups. And for the folks who live in New England, this would be something that would be fairly easy for them to access. So today we've done an Italian pasta fagioli. We've done the Persian Ash-e Reshteh or Iranian Ash-e Reshteh. We're doing this New England crab corn chowder, and we're going to do the French onion soup, of course. All right. Browning up better here.
Okay, if I was gonna be doing this for my family and I had all the time in the world, I would let this brown for probably another 5 or 10 minutes. But because we're kind of running low on time, I want to go ahead and move on. There, you know, once you get everything cooked down, you're not gonna notice that they're not completely caramelized. It's just that the flavor won't be quite as intense as you get when the onions really do caramelize well. So if you have the time, please continue to cook them until they really start to brown, and you can see that. So the next thing I would do then is I'm going to add in my white wine to my onions. And I don't drink wine, so I typically buy these little bottles and just keep them in my pantry for cooking. So this is just a little bottle of white wine, again, that you can get at any grocery store here locally that sells wine. There we go. Let that get into my onions. This is where you would also add the sherry if you have any. It would also give this a lot of nice flavor. Hand this off away. Wow, really does smell amazing when you add that wine into those onions. Cooking down. Now, if my onions had been a little more caramelized, this would be a little bit browner at this point. It's still fairly creamy colored with just a little bit of brown. So if you caramelize your onions, you're going to see a much darker liquid sauce starting to form. Okay, we've got that in there. And now we're going to add in about, what did I say there? 1 tablespoon of all-purpose flour. I pre-measured it, so I'm just kind of sprinkling my flour in and around, and that's going to be a thickener for me. So it's going into those onions. Alex, you want to do an over? There we go. So you see the flour is just getting mixed into those onions and that wine, and that's going to thicken the soup up a little bit when we add the broth. I might want to check on the bread. Sorry. Okay. All right. As he's working on that bread, I'm going to ladle in my broth. And it's important that the broth be hot when you add it to the onion mixture, so that it continues to cook. That cooking a little bit. And again, this is where you can kind of decide how thick or thin you would like your soup to be. French onion soup is typically not super thick. Keep adding broth. See how that looks. That's fine, buddy. Those look great. Okay. A bit more maybe here. Because this is going to continue to cook for a while, we want to make sure it has enough liquid in it that as it cooks, it doesn't dry out too badly. There we go. Okay, I think we're getting there. There we go. Once you've allowed this to cook down a little bit more and you think you're at a point where you want to taste it, that's where you can adjust your salt and pepper and add in whatever makes you comfortable. All right. So as I said, this is going to continue to cook a bit more. So while I am rinsing out this pan and scooting this one over, I will let, where did I put that? I will let Alex move things over. There we go. All right. Continue to cook on that burner. And now we're gonna quickly move on to the crab corn chowder, which goes actually very quickly. Just need to rinse this pan real quick. Okay. All right, back to the crab corn chowder. As you can see, like I said, we already pre-cooked our bacon. We have 2 stalks of celery that we diced up. We have a medium onion that we diced up. I'm going to be using vegetable broth for this again, as I said, so that my daughter will eat it. You can use the chicken broth or seafood stock if you have that. I have some flour that I'm going to be adding in. I have this delicious corn that a good friend of mine, Jane Reese, grew on her farm. And I got over the summer and I packed it away, you know, froze it. And so I thought a bunch of that for this dish. So fresh corn is great. And then I also went and picked up some heavy cream, which we'll be getting out of the fridge, Alex. We have salt and pepper, and we have some fresh cilantro here as well. The other thing we did was yesterday we ran out to Main Bay and Berry. So if you're local to State College and you want really, really good fresh crab, you can get that. You can get crab at Wegmans. You can get canned crab, but I wanted the really nice fresh crab. So we went out to Main Bay and Berry and got, this is just half a pound. Crab at the moment is going for about $42 a pound. So this is half a pound. And so we'll get started on that. So the bacon I had already cooked. And then I'm going to now go back over to the stove and start cooking my celery, pepper, and onions. And again, I'm going to use a little bit of olive oil for that. Yep, there we go. All right. All right, onions are going in. Celery is going in. And the red pepper. These were all diced about the same size so that they'll cook fairly evenly. Just going to saute these until they all start to get a little tender. I'm going to give my French onion soup a little stir. Next thing on the agenda would be to get my broth and my flour going. So I'm going to use a separate bowl to whisk my broth and my flour. I'm using the vegetable broth, you use what you have. And then I'm going to use a whisk to just whisk in. Let's see if I can get it where you can see here. Oops. Just whisk in my flour. you see any clumps that you need to break up, you might need to use a spoon, but if you try to whisk it, it should break up pretty easily. And of course, this is just going to thicken your soup up a little bit, that flour. You stir these a bit. Starting to look like the onions are getting a little translucent, so it's starting to cook down, which is good. Go, we've got our broth ready, and then we're going to I left out. Okay, go ahead and add your corn in right here. There we go. I missed that in the recipe. You can go ahead and add your corn in with the other vegetables. Go. Get all the heat through. Check on my ash back here. Yeah, those vegetables are starting to look nicely wilted and incorporated. We'll go over here to the pasta fagioli, which is also looking good. Maybe add just a little bit more of that beef stock. As I said, this one tends to kind of suck up a lot of moisture. There we go. I'll use the last of that. Now, if I feel we need any more liquid after that, I'll move to just adding water. But I think this might be enough. All nice and warm. All right, now I'm going to add in my broth. Give it one more stir. There we go. All right. That mixed in. I add the rest of my vegetable broth. We're going to have to let that cook down a little bit. All right. While that is cooking, just check on this onion a little bit one more time. Wow, this is smelling really, really nice. Again, you want to check all of these for salt and pepper to your taste, whatever works for you and your family. And so we're going to let that crab corn chowder cook down quite a bit. You want to bring that over here? There we go. All right, and the last thing I want to do while those things are
sort of simmering and finishing up is to show you how to do the topping for the Ash-e Reshteh. So I'm gonna need to move, let's see, how about we get a hot plate out, Alex? And we're gonna move the French onion soup. We need the hot pad, sorry, what do you call them? The things, yes, you need 2 of those because this is gonna be real warm. We're gonna move the French onion soup over here because I only have 4 burners and I need a burner to show you how we're gonna do that last step. Let's put that right there. Okay, we'll get him to move things around just a bit back over here. Switch this over to the other burner. All right, get a little bit of a skillet out here. All right, so the topping for your Ash-e Reshteh is basically onion and mint. So I'm putting a little bit of olive oil in there, gonna get that heated up good. And I'm gonna bring that onion that was somewhere. Oh, here it is. Bring my onion over here and add it in and start to cook that down. Again, I'm breaking up those rounds. Yep, we will. Yeah, that's looking good. I think we do need to add a little bit of water to that ash. It's starting to. All right, and this is where with the ash, we're gonna go ahead and make sure we've got plenty of liquid in there. And then we're gonna add our noodles in because those cook really quickly as well. I'm gonna use about half of my bag here. Depends on how much you like in yours. I'm gonna break mine down into half. Go. And I'm just gonna add those directly into my pot and let them start to cook. Just cook down in just a few minutes. They're very, very pliable and easy to cook quickly. Those are cooking into the ash. We're going to be cooking these onions. These onions. And again, you want these to get really nice and brown. A little bit more oil. I will also say that in a typical Iranian household, they use a lot more oil than I do. I tend to go really light on the oil, but when you get this in a Persian restaurant or in a home in Iran or with a native Iranian chef, you'll probably see a lot more oil on top of your ash or your stew. I tend to go light on that. Okay, still want them to cook. Right, well, those are heating up. Back over here and see how my crab corn chowder is going. It's all starting to boil. And again, this goes really quickly. Ash. Put that on for a minute. Yes, I have some bowls out right here. I wanted to use. Maybe we'll use this one. French onion. This one. There we go. Okay. Fajoul is really about ready, I would say. Just let it kind of simmer and stay warm. Ash needs just a few more minutes.
while we're cooking the topping for that as well. Crab corn chowder. It's probably a little bit longer. All right. Well, my onions are starting to cook up over here. And again, this is one of those things that you think you've got a lot of onion in there, but once it cooks down, it ends up being very little. So when I'm doing this at home, you know, and there's maybe say 4 of us eating, I'll do like an onion per person for the topping because it really cooks down quite a lot. Okay, I will also just a little bit of salt and pepper in here. Yeah, that'll be for the French onion, the big one, because we need to be able to fit that bread on top, right? Alex, can you lower that so they can see what I'm doing? There we go. All right, so this is cooking the onions down, getting them a little bit browned. And once they start to brown, that's when we're going to add in our mint. Down. There we go. Starting to brown up. While that's doing that, I'll get my mint out. Start just sprinkling that around the onions. So this is that dried mint that I was talking about. And this will add a lot more flavor to your ash. Okay. Let me get a little closer with that so they can, there we go. So you can see the mint on the onion as the onion is browning up. Couple more minutes. Let's see how this is doing. Yeah, it's on. Okay. Almost ready. I'm gonna mix those up a little bit. So I think we could go ahead and plate up pasta fagioli so you can get an idea of what that's going to look like. All my burners going, this is hot over the top. All right, we'll bring this over here. And I'm going to go to the overhead camera for a minute. And we'll show you what our pasta fagioli and our French onion soup are going to look like. Get everything else out. There we go. We've got the 2 pieces of bread that we've just laid right on top there. We've got the pasta fagioli. You can add a little cilantro on top of that to make that look nice. And we're gonna come back in just a minute. Okay, these onions are definitely doing what I need them to do. So you want them to look nice and dark, caramelized, almost blackened. The mint makes them look a little darker than they actually are, but this is kind of what the look you're going for. Nice and dark. Okay. So we can now do a bit of the ash. Running out of. Hang on just a second. No, we can use this one. Yeah. All right.
All of it, oh gosh.
This one's fine. Yep. Okay. Put some ash in here. Oops. My noodles are dripping. And again, I will, if I had more time, I would let this cook just a little bit longer. But for now, we're going to put this over here. I'm going to bring my onions over. Let's go back to the overhead. This is how we would put some of the onions on top. And then we would allow people to choose if they want to add any of the yogurt on top of that, since I don't have the cash. That would be traditional. So for me, if I was going to be making this bowl, I would do that and add just a dollop of yogurt on top. That, and it also makes the ash a little bit creamier with that yogurt in there. So those are 3 of our soups so far. We're going to finish up this last one. So we're going to stir in a little bit of our crab meat. Yep, that's really hot. I don't know where all those hot meat. There we go. Here. All right. This one off, that one back on. All right, last soup here. So this is my crab corn chowder. Alex, would you grab the immersion blender just so I can show them? It's not a part of this recipe, but if we want, we can. Oh, that wasn't on there good. We can, I like to do a little bit of an immersion blender and just kind of immersion some of this up. Oops, make it a little thicker. I wouldn't do it all, but I would do quite a bit of it to thicken the soup and make it a little more chowdery. So as you can hear, I'm using this immersion blender. If you don't have one, don't worry about it. The soup will taste fine. It just thickens it up a little to do this and breaks up the vegetables a little bit more. But you certainly don't want it to be all mush. So you just do a little bit. There we go. That. Okay, now that that's done, some of our crab, about half or so of the crab. And we're going to add in, let me stir that up just a little bit, about a cup of heavy cream. Oops. Go. Eyeball that and say that's about a half a cup. And as you can see, it's starting to look much more creamy and like a chowder. So then you just need to add in some cilantro, which I have over here. I had pre-chopped my cilantro. Add that in. And just let it cook until it's pretty much heated through
until the cilantro starts to wilt just slightly. Nice and chowdery. Okay. Here we go. All right. Then we're going to come over here to the overhead, and I'll show you how we're going to put that on. We can go to add just a little bit more of the crab on top for looks that the people can then, you know, add in themselves. And you can add a little bit of the bacon if you like around the edges to give it that bacon flavor, or of course you don't have to. I have a pescatarian, she's not going to do that, but I think the rest of us will be adding bacon to ours. There we go. So this is how our 4 dishes came out. We have the French onion soup with the garlic Tuscan bread with Gruyere on top that we broiled over the soup. We have the pasta fagioli with a little bit of cilantro on top. We have the Persian Ash-e Reshteh with the onion and yogurt topping, which is the noodle soup. And then we have the crab corn chowder with a little bit of bacon and crab on top. Please join me in January as I welcome my friend Deo, who is from Nigeria. She's going to be doing some Nigerian food for us, and that will be the last Sunday in January. I believe it's the 30th. So Deo will be with me for that. And then coming up in February, I have a really special treat for everyone with a Thai chef. And so she's going to be doing some wonderful Thai food for us. Then we're going to move on through the spring to some Japanese food, some Ethiopian food. So we have a lot in store for you the rest of the winter and the spring. And I hope you'll come back then. Keep an eye on wpsu.org/worldkitchen, and you'll see all of that information pop up. Thanks very much.